Welcome to our daily reflection for this Friday, July 18th. And of course, every Friday we remember Good Friday and our Lord's love for us. He died for us, so we make a little sacrifice. Because as Jesus said, when the bridegroom is taken away on that day, they will mourn and they will fast. And so on Fridays, we mourn and fast a little bit and make a sacrifice out of love. Now, today we have this reading from the book of Exodus, and there's lots of instruction, and it can seem a bit like an instruction manual, and it is for Israel. It was an instruction manual for their liturgy and for their life. And God says to Moses, this day, this month, will be the head of all of your calendar. And on the 10th day of this month, you are to have the Passover. So he's given him the instructions for the first Passover, but he's saying that this Passover is now your whole calendar, the way you keep time, is to be realigned according to this festival of the Passover. And that's going to be really important. And in a sense, this event reorders Israel's sense of time, their calendar, and now it begins a liturgical calendar. That there's going to be a day every year that they celebrate the Passover. And this liturgical calendar, this day, as he goes on to say, will be, as he closes the reading, he says, this will be a memorial feast for you, for all generations, to celebrate with pilgrimage to the Lord as a perpetual institution. And so this is not a one-off event, it's to be a perpetual liturgical event. And so now we have, for the first time in the history of the people of God, an event that is going to be a liturgical feast day to remember what God did in the past, to remember this day of the Passover. And so that remembering is going to be very, very important for the life of Israel. And this is the beginning of, in a sense, sacred time. Now, we know in Genesis that God set aside the seventh day as sacred time, but we haven't really seen in the biblical narrative of the patriarchs, or even in the time of Israel and Egypt, that they really recognized or practiced that liturgical time. God will reset them in the Exodus to honor the Sabbath, and that will be really important. But here we have a first feast day, a making sacred in time. Now, Jacob had made sacred Bethel, this place where he encountered God. So there was a sense of sacred place, but now there's a sense of sacred time. And that will be really important for the history and life of God's people. This idea of making and setting aside certain times, certain days in the calendar year in order to honor what God has done in time, in history, in encountering and saving his people. So the point is this: God acts in our history and in time, and now we take part of that time and set it aside to remember what God has done, to make that time sacred. And so this idea that there's sacred space where Bethel, or the house of God, temple, will be, but there's also a sense of sacred time. And God's inviting his people into a relationship with him to set aside sacred time. And we know sacred time is every Sabbath, every Lord's Day, every Sunday. We already began by talking about every Friday. There's a little bit of sense of sacred time here, remembering Good Friday, making a fast, making that time sacred, holy. And here we have the Passover as the first sacred feast day for Israel. And there'll be more feast days added as we go through the history of Israel and the history of the church, because God's people, both Jews and Christians, remember what God has done, and we make that time sacred and celebrate God's intervention in our time. So let's reflect on that today in our meditation, that there is a sense of sacred time, just as there's a sense of sacred space where the temple and the church is. So let's honor that sacred time and dedicate it to God. May the Lord bless and keep you.
This daily reflection is brought to you thanks to the generous support of the Mission Circle. Join the Mission Circle to help Catholics worldwide understand, live, and share their faith. Sign up at missioncircle.org today.